Alright, now we are moving to the second part of this module, disconnection from self, and starting with the lesson on distractions. Have you ever looked up from your phone or finished binge watching something and thought, wait, what did I just do with the last hour? Or maybe you have felt you're going through the motions, doing a lot, but not really feeling connected to any of it. That feeling is often a sign of distraction. And I don't just mean phones or social media. I'm talking about all the ways we sometimes keep ourselves busy, numb, or entertained to avoid something deeper. It could be emotions we don't want to face, decisions we're putting off, or truth about ourselves that feel uncomfortable to look at. But here's the thing, if we are constantly distracted, we don't get the chance to hear our own voice. We stay disconnected from who we are, what we really feel, and what matters most to us. So in this lesson, we're not here to shame anyone for scrolling or zoning out. We all do it. The goal is to slow down just enough to notice. What are the distractions in my life really doing? What might they be protecting me from? And what are they costing me? By the end of this lesson, the aim is for you to be able to clearly identify how distractions might be holding you back and how they could be stopping you from living more authentically. This is about getting honest, getting curious, and hopefully getting a little closer to yourself. So we will start by looking at the definition of distractions, then seeing why they block authenticity. Then we have a look at all the distraction types. And finally, it will be your turn to identify how distractions are currently holding you back in your life. So, what are distractions? Distractions can be as powerful as fears in preventing someone from living authentically. They divert attention, energy, and intention away from the inner self and towards external noise, numbing, or avoidance. We live in a world that encourages the practice of those activities, acting as distractions from our true selves. Those activities literally distract you from yourself, prevent you from being connected to yourself, being in touch with yourself, living in the now, present moment. If a behavior or habit keeps you from being present with yourself, feeling your feelings, or making aligned choices, it might be a distraction, even if it looks productive or socially acceptable. So how do distractions prevent you from being yourself? Well, those activities often leave you feeling empty, acting as a distraction from our true selves. They distract yourself from making a change, being more true to yourself. Distractions prevent you from living authentically because they pull your attention away from your inner world, your true feelings, values, and desires. And when you are constantly caught up in distractions like social media, instant pleasures, or drama, you don't give yourself the space to reflect and connect with who you really are. This makes it harder to hear your own voice and leads you to live according to habits or external expectations instead of your authentic self. Many distractions also serve as ways to avoid uncomfortable emotions such as fear, sadness, or loneliness. By numbing or suppressing those feelings, you delay important self-awareness and personal growth. Instead of engaging with your deeper needs, you settle for short-term pleasures that don't nourish your true identity. And over time, this can leave you feeling empty or confused about who you really are. And finally, distractions consume your time and energy, leaving less space for meaningful self-discovery or genuine connection. They often mask fears of vulnerability or discomfort, making it tempting to stay busy or entertained rather than being present with yourself. And in this way, distractions build a barrier between you and your authentic life, making it difficult to express your true self and find lasting fulfillment. So now we're going to have a look at all the different distraction types. So the first one is digital distractions. So here are a few examples of them. Mindless social media scrolling. So you're reaching for your phone during every free moment without intention. Here the underlying avoidance might be escaping boredom, might be loneliness or anxiety, avoiding the discomfort of being alone with your thoughts. Thinking that if you're scrolling, You don't have to think about how disconnected or unsure you feel. Then it can also be obsessive content consumption, like you constantly binge watch shows, videos, or podcasts even when you are not enjoying them. And here the underlying avoidance may be feeling silence or avoiding decisions, emotions, or self-reflection, thinking that if you keep watching, you don't have to ask why you feel stuck or what you really want from life. Then it can also be constant notifications and multitasking. It could be that your phone or smartwatch is always buzzing, pulling your attention in every direction. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid full presence, especially in emotionally vulnerable, intimate, or quiet moments, thinking that if you stay distracted, you don't have to feel exposed or uncertain in this conversation. Then another example is to always be connected, but being rarely present. So you might reply instantly to text messages, emails, even during meals, conversations, or rest. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid stillness, boundaries, or self-awareness. This constant connection feels like control, but erodes authentic presence. You might be thinking that if you disconnect, you might have to listen to what is actually going on inside you. Another example is productivity rabbit holes. So you watch endless videos or read posts on routines, habits, or self-improvement, but you rarely implement them. Here, the underlying avoidance is that you avoid actually doing the deeper emotional or behavioral work by researching instead of acting, thinking that if you keep learning about how to be better, then you don't have to confront the fear of starting. Then another example is gaming in virtual worlds. So you spend hours in immersive games, online communities, or virtual reality environments. And here the underlying avoidance is escaping from a life that feels unfulfilling, or avoiding the vulnerability and predictability of real-world connection, thinking that in the game you have purpose and control, and real life feels overwhelming or empty. Another example is doom scrolling the news. So you might get lost reading articles after articles, even though it increases your anxiety or hopelessness. And here the underlying avoidance is that it creates a sense of purpose or urgency, but it distracts from taking action in your own life or feeling personal, thinking that if you stay focused on the chaos out there, you don't have to face the chaos in here. And here is the impact of digital distractions. Authenticity. So digital distractions often keeps us from being present, reflective, and in touch with our deeper truth. And they numb our emotions. They fuel comparisons. They block self-awareness, keeping us from being present and connected to our deeper truth. The next type of distraction is business and overcommitment. So it might look like an overbooked calendar. You fill every hour of your day with meetings, appointments, errands, and social plans. And here, the underlying avoidance might be that you avoid stillness, reflection, loneliness, or existential discomfort, because slowing down might force you to feel what you've been suppressing. So you're thinking that if you stop moving, you might have to admit that you are not happy in your career or relationship. Another example of business and overcommitment is always saying yes. You agree to every favor, event, or project, even if you are exhausted or uninterested. And here the underlying avoidance might be that you fear disappointing others, being seen as selfish, or having to confront what you actually want, which may be different from what is expected of you, thinking that if you say no, they might not like you, and then you would have to deal with that rejection. Another example is identity through achievement. So you define your worth by how much you get done or how many roles you juggle: employee, parent, friend, student. And here the underlying avoidance is that doing becomes a substitute for being. You may be afraid of who you are without your accomplishments. So thinking that if you're not achieving or helping, then you don't know who you are. Another example is chronic multitasking. So if you are always doing 2 or more things at once, working while eating, texting during conversations, or mentally rehearsing the next task. And here the underlying avoidance is that you avoid being fully present in the moment, where uncomfortable feelings or unmet needs might surface. Thinking that if you focus on this one thing, you might feel your sadness or realize that you are burnt out. And then another example of busyness and overcommitment is planning obsession. So you are constantly planning the next thing, vacation, dinner, 5-year career roadmap, leaving little room for spontaneous things or emotional honesty. And here the underlying avoidance is that planning gives a sense of control, which helps avoid the messiness and uncertainty of authentic living. Thinking that if you plan everything, you don't have to face what you're actually feeling right now. So busyness and overcommitment often looks like being productive or helpful, but beneath the surface, it can be a way to avoid emotions, personal truth, or difficult change. It is a way to avoid facing your true self or desires, staying busy to escape uncomfortable thoughts or feelings. So the next distraction type is addictions and compulsions. So for example, phone and social media addiction, endlessly scrolling, checking notifications, or reaching for your phone during moments of silence or boredom. And here the underlying avoidance again is to avoid loneliness, comparison-induced self-doubt, or the discomfort of not knowing what truly matters, thinking that if you keep scrolling, you don't have to feel how lost or disconnected you feel. Then there is food as comfort or escape. So emotional eating, binge eating, or obsessing over diets and food rules. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid feelings like sadness, emptiness, or anxiety, and food becomes a way to fill in an emotional void, thinking that eating numbs the ache that you cannot name. Then another example is workaholism, so constantly working, checking emails late at night, or never really taking real time off. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid feelings of unworthiness, fear of failure, or questions about your true purpose, thinking that if you slow down, you will have to face the fact that you are not passionate about what you do anymore. Then there is compulsive shopping or online spending, so constantly buying things you don't need to feel better or feel void. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid low self-worth, it's identity confusion, or the discomfort of facing what is really missing in your life, thinking that buying this makes you feel like you have it together, even though you're struggling inside. Then there is overexercising or obsessive fitness, so rigid, compulsive workout routines, punishing your body or exercising to earn food or approval. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid insecurities, control issues, or discomfort around your appearance and worth, thinking that if you look perfect, maybe you will feel acceptable, even if you don't feel aligned inside. And then we have gaming and fantasy immersion. So spending hours in video games or fantasy worlds instead of engaging with real life or relationships. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid the challenges of the real world connections, purpose, or agency, thinking this game gives you meaning and control when your life feels aimless. But here's the thing, those distractions numb pain and avoid discomfort by offering quick relief, but they often mask emotional emptiness and disconnect you from your true self and unmet needs. The next distraction is taking on caretaking roles. So for example, being the fixer in every relationship. So taking on others' problems, offering advice, emotional support, or stepping in to solve issues that are not yours to carry. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid your own emotional pain, anxiety, or unmet needs by staying focused on others, thinking that if you help everyone else feel okay, maybe you will not have to admit that you are not okay yourself. Another example is overfunctioning in partnerships. So you do most of the emotional labor, planning, and caretaking in your romantic relationship. Here, the underlying avoidance is that filling a role gives you identity, control, or worth, And because you may fear asking for your own needs or facing an imbalanced relationship, thinking that if you keep giving, they will not leave, that if you ask something, they might. Another example is the parentified child or sibling role. So you grew up taking care of siblings, parents, or emotionally unstable adults and still carry that identity into adulthood. Here, the underlying avoidance is staying in a familiar survivor role that prevents you from exploring your own identity, dreams, or emotional landscape, thinking that you don't even know who you are outside of being the one who holds everything together. Another example is being the go-to support friend. Everyone comes to you for advice, venting, or crisis help, but you rarely share your own struggles. Here, the underlying avoidance is hiding vulnerability, staying in control, and avoiding the discomfort of being seen as needy, weak, or too much, thinking that as long as you are useful, you will be valued, and that if you ask for help, you will be burdened. Another example is being the emotional sponge at work. So here you take on others' stress, emotions, or workload, even outside your work description. And here the underlying avoidance is to avoid boundaries, saying no, or stepping into your own authority or creative space, thinking that if you carry the weight, maybe you will not have to risk disappointing people or standing up for what you really want. And then another example is caretaking as identity. So when you don't know who you are, if you are not helping, managing, or emotionally supporting someone, here the underlying avoidance is avoiding self-exploration, authenticity, or a life built around your own values and interests, thinking that being the helper makes you feel safe, but you don't know what you want beyond that. So caretaking roles can often mask a loss of personal identity and unmet emotional needs, but they often become a subtle, exhausting way to avoid one's own needs, desires, or identity. When you constantly take care of others, you may lose touch with your inner world, which keeps you from living authentically. The next distraction is materialism and consumerism. So, for example, constant shopping to feel better. You buy things, clothes, gadgets, beauty products when you're stressed, bored, or feeling low. And here, the underlying avoidance is trying to fill emotional emptiness, insecurity, or a lack of identity with external things, thinking that buying this makes you feel new or in control, at least for a while. Another example is defining self-worth by possessions. You believe that your car, home, wardrobe, or tech must reflect success or status. Here, the underlying avoiding feelings of inadequacy or failure by trying to look the part instead of living in alignment with what truly matters to you, thinking that if you look successful, maybe you won't feel like you're not enough. Another example is designer or brand obsession. You are drawn to luxury brands or name dropping as a way to project identity, taste, or belonging. And here the underlying avoidance is hiding insecurities or a lack of self-definition behind a curated identity, thinking that wearing this label gives you a sense of value, even if you are unsure of who you really are without it. Another example is buying to impress others. You make purchases based on what will look good on social media, at work, or among friends. And here the underlying avoidance is avoiding rejection or disapproval by aligning your choices with external validation rather than inner desire, thinking that if they see you as stylish or successful, maybe you will finally feel accepted. Another distraction is decorating as an escape. You constantly redecorate or shop for home goods, chasing a feeling of peace, control, or worth. And here the underlying avoidance is trying to shape your outer world to make up for inner chaos or dissatisfaction, thinking that if you just find the perfect couch, maybe you will feel like your life is in order. Then we have the emotional identity in retail therapy. So shopping becomes a coping mechanism. your go-to reward, self-care, or distraction. And here, the underlying avoidance is that you avoid feelings like loneliness, sadness, or dissatisfaction with current life circumstances, thinking that you don't know how else to care for yourself, so you buy something to feel alive. And then we have always wanting the next thing. You are never satisfied with what you have, always chasing the next phone, outfit, trip, or upgrade. And here, the underlying avoidance is to avoid being present or content. The chase masks a deeper sense of lack or unfulfillment, thinking that you don't know who you are without something to strive for or acquire. But here is the thing. Chasing possessions like houses or cars often masks deeper needs, offering false fulfillment while distracting you from authentic living. They promise identity, status, or fulfillment through possessions, but often serve as a way to avoid deeper emotional or existential needs. The next distraction type is instant gratification and dopamine-seeking behaviors. For example, reaching for junk food or sugar, grabbing chips, cookies, soda, or takeout when you are stressed, tired, or bored. And here, the underlying avoidance is to soothe discomfort or emotional emptiness without addressing the real source of the feeling, thinking that this tastes good and this makes you feel better for a few minutes. Then you crash and feel worse. Then we have binge watching. So consuming multiple episodes or videos in one sitting, even when you are not fully enjoying them. Here, the underlying avoidance is to avoid loneliness, life dissatisfaction, or the pressure to be productive, thinking that one more episode keeps you from thinking about how disconnected you feel. Another example is scrolling for likes and validation, checking for notifications, likes, or messages repeatedly throughout the day. Here, the underlying avoidance is to seek quick hits of approval instead of cultivating a stable sense of self-worth or real connection, thinking that that little red heart makes you feel seen but fades away fast. Then there is impulse shopping. So buying things online you don't really need because it feels exciting or satisfying in the moment. And here, the underlying avoidance is chasing novelty or control while avoiding deeper feelings of satisfaction or lack of purpose, thinking that clicking buy now gives you a rush and it's easier than facing what you're really missing. Another example of instant gratification is avoiding hard tasks with quick wins. So doing low-effort tasks like checking email, cleaning, or organizing instead of facing a meaningful but uncomfortable project or decision. Here, the underlying avoidance is to escape uncertainty, fear failure, or inner resistance by choosing ease over purpose, thinking that it feels good to cross something off your list, even if you're avoiding what really matters. And then another example is always chasing the next novelty. Jumping from hobby to hobby, idea to idea, or job to job without finishing or grounding in any of them. And here the underlying avoidance is avoiding the discipline, boredom, or identity work required to go deeper and build something real, thinking that the beginning is always exciting. But here is the thing. Those instant gratifications, numb emotions, they fuel comparisons and lower your self-awareness, offering quick pleasure but often disconnecting you from deeper purpose and authenticity over time. These behaviors flood your brain with feel-good chemicals in short term, but often leave you more disconnected from your deeper values, goals, or emotions in the long run. And the last distraction is drama and gossip. So being always in the middle of other people's conflicts. You insert yourself into friends or coworkers' arguments, acting as the peacemaker, advisor, or judge. And here, the underlying avoidance is avoiding your own relational boundaries, emotions, or personal challenges by managing someone else's chaos, thinking that if you focus on fixing their drama, you don't have to face your own mess. Another example is talking about others behind their backs. You regularly share details, opinions, or criticisms about people who are not present, especially in judgmental tones. Here, the underlying avoidance is boosting your own sense of worth, safety, or belonging through superiority or alliance building, thinking that if we are talking about them, no one is looking at your own flaws or pain. Then we have following celebrity or influencer drama obsessively. You spend hours tracking online fights, scandals, or reality TV conflict, despite it not affecting your life. Here, the underlying avoidance is escaping your own discomfort, satisfaction, or self-doubt by living through other people's chaos, thinking that watching their downfall is weirdly satisfying, maybe because you feel like a mess yourself. Then there is using gossip to deflect your own growth. You criticize how others live, parent, work, or dress, but you rarely reflect on your own life choices. Here, the underlying avoidance is deflecting from self-awareness, jealousy, or insecurity by focusing judgment outward. Thinking that if you talk about how lost they are, you don't have to admit that you're feeling the same. And finally, we have getting emotionally hooked by every crisis. You feel deeply invested in other people's breakups, betrayals, or workplace issues, even when it's not your business. Here, the underlying avoidance is using external drama to avoid quiet moments of self-reflection, emotional healing, or personal decision-making, feeling that as long as you are wrapped up in the crisis, you don't have to deal with your own. And here is the impact. Drama and gossip provide distractions and stimulation, but they pull you from your true self, keeping you focused on external chaos instead of your own growth and emotions. Alright, now it's your turn to identify how distractions are holding you back in your life. So you will find in the workbook several exercises helping you to do that. So the first exercise will help you to list all the distractions that apply to you. The second exercise will help you pick your most common distractions and finding the trigger for them. The third exercise will give you some self-reflection prompts to help you identify those distractions. The fourth exercise will help you identify your top 3 distractions based on your earlier reflections and help you see what's getting in your way. And don't forget to write down all the aha moments you've had throughout this lesson on page 6 of your workbook.